with me for me, please. Dear God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be pleasing unto you, O Lord, our Redeemer. Empty me of all of me and fill me with all of you, so that it's your word and your word alone that comes through this day. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I want you to listen to my sermon today, okay? Because I think that you'll understand it. I was at my mom's this week helping to take care of her, and she says, I texted your dad today and told her that I was getting ready to write your sermon for Sunday and asked him what he thought that I should write. And I had no idea she had in her plans that she was going to write my sermon for this week, but apparently she did. And so my dad says, well, tell her you should write about God's mercy or God's love, and you should be okay. And so she tells me this, and I said, well, Mom, I've already kind of prepared my sermon for Sunday, and so I don't really need your help with it this week, but thank you for offering. She said, well, what are you going to preach about? And I said, well, it's All Saints Sunday. It's where we celebrate all those people that have gone before us. And so I'm preaching out of the book of Thessalonians, and we're singing when the saints are marching in, and because he lives, and Jesus is coming soon. She said, you don't need to preach. So I kind of agree with her. All that music this morning has spoken into our hearts, I know, and I appreciate that. I want to tell you this morning about a few of the saints in my life that have gone before me. One was my grandmother Green. My grandmother Green was a little lady, and she was a very soft-spoken lady, and she was a gentle lady. And the things that she taught me was she taught me to be able to look at people and to see them for who they are, and to appreciate the good in each person that I come across. She taught me to look for the good. And she would always point out the good in others, even when other people were pointing out the faults in others. She taught me that. My grandmother Dotson was also a very soft-spoken lady, and she taught me hospitality. She taught me what it meant to put the smell of baked bread out into the atmosphere, and the healing that can come across from just taking a plate of food to someone when they have a need. And then there was my grandfather Green, who taught me integrity. Paul worked for CP&L for many years as a safety person, and he had a company car. And he would come home from work in the evening. My grandmother would call and say, we need a loaf of bread. And he would pass 4 grocery stores on the way home in his company car to pick up his personal car, because he wasn't going to use his company car for personal business. He was all about integrity. And he taught me what it meant to look back into my history and into the heritage, into who my ancestors were, and to learn from it and to appreciate it. And then there was my grandfather Dotson. I think I've told the story before. We called him Great after he began having great-grandchildren, and my nephew was his first great-grandchild. And one day when he was just a little boy, maybe not even 2 years old, just barely talking, he's out on our mountain in Fairview, and he's hollering, God! God! And his mom says, what are you doing, son? He said, I'm looking for Great. Well, but you're hollering for God. He said, well, God is great. So that was a family joke. But my grandfather Dotson embodied the love of Christ so well that it was fitting. And when he was in the last days of his life, I was reflecting on that, on the lessons that he had taught us, and I called them the great lessons of life. He taught us hospitality as well. He taught us to be a hard worker. He taught us not to worry about your grass, but to enjoy your children playing ball in the yard. See, because you could pick out first, second, third, and home in my grandfather's yard where we had all played and slid in the dirt. And it was more important to him to see the joy on children's playing faces than it was to have a pristine yard. We learned to appreciate those kinds of things from my grandfather Dotson. And I'm wondering this morning, who are the saints in your life that have left those footprints on your heart by teaching you lessons that you can carry throughout your life? Think about those folks right now. And think about the lessons that they have taught you in your life. we've had some deaths this year in our own family, here in our congregation. And think about the lessons that those folks have taught us. Al Raby taught us to smile. All the time, he had a smile on his face. He taught us how to support people and support things. I can't think of a thing that this church or Mulberry or Asbury or Union had in the time. If Al was here and something was going on at one of the churches, he made sure he went and that he was there to support. And then we have Betty Naden, who taught us how to live in the midst of adversity, who taught us how to keep a sense of humor, always. And then we have Jim Hubler, who taught us how to laugh. And how to laugh loud and big. And we get to experience that laugh through these children's laughter every week. And he also taught us how to keep showing up, even in the midst of the pain. And then we have Albert, who taught us to always be good, as much as we can. Who taught us how to smile, always. Who gave us the gift of his presence all the time. A couple of weeks ago, it was pointed out to me that sometimes the numbers on the board start going down and we worry. And that happens when you are in an aging congregation, right? But see, these saints have gone before us and they have left footprints on our hearts to keep the work at going. And when we look at the book of Thessalonians this morning, I think it's important for us to keep that in our minds. Because see, when we look at the book of Thessalonians and we look at what Paul was writing about, remember he had come to Thessalonica and he was setting up the church in Thessalonica. And he had opposition that was so great that it drove him out of town. And it left the church there dealing with the aftermath of that. And so he takes Timothy and sends Timothy back to check on them. And Timothy comes back and reports to them that they are doing great. They are going strong. They are spreading the good news of God's love in the midst of their pain and their adversity, in the midst of the oppositions that they are facing. And so Paul writes them this letter to encourage them to keep up the good work, to teach them some more. Well, one of the things they were apparently worried about was that some of the people that were there and were working with them had been dying. And so Paul wants to address that opposition in his letter, in the text we read today, from chapter 4, verses 13 to 18. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about those who have died, so that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so through Jesus Christ, God will bring him those who have died. For this we declare to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will by no means precede those who have died. For the Lord himself, with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of God's trumpet, will descend from heaven, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up in the clouds together with them to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. See, friends, Paul knew that Jesus Christ conquered death. And that we who believe that we who have Jesus Christ in our hearts and in our lives, and who try to live the life that he taught us to live, that we have a hope that other folks who don't know him don't have. It's our job to create that hope in this world. And so when there are times when we feel like we can't go on, whether it's the grief of the loss of a loved one, or whether it's some other kind of grief, when we feel like it has overcome and overtaken us, we can remember the words of the song, Because He Lives, and we can know that because He lives, we can face tomorrow. We can face anything that this world puts in our path. He holds our grieving hearts in the palm of his hand, and he massages them with his love. And he loves each and every one of us. We serve a resurrection God. We serve a God that takes that which is dead and brings it back to life. We serve a God that it doesn't matter if we are facing the death of a relationship, or we're facing the death of expectations, or we're facing the death of our dreams. He can take the brokenness of that and he can mold it like a potter molds clay, and he can breathe life in it like he breathed life into Adam, and we can become alive again in him. So, my friends, we are a people of hope. And what we do is we take those lessons that we've learned from those saints that have gone before us, and we remember them, and we hold them in our heart, and we live the lessons that they implanted in us through their own lives in Christ. I've heard so many stories of people I wish I had known that helped make this the church of Dryman's Chapel. So many. Jim Buck, Nev, Mike, Albert, Jim, Al, Hazel, Betty, and I can continue on and on. Your grandparents, your great-grandparents. And they've left a legacy for us. And when we gather around the table for communion, we are communing with all those saints who have gone before us. And that gives us hope. So let's live into that hope this day. In the name of the Father, the